Hello everyone, many thanks for joining this, the third webinar in the series on flood and drought management. My name's Gareth Lloyd and I'm a Senior Advisor at the UNEP-DHI Partnership, United Nations Collaboration Centre in the area of freshwater and environment. It's my job to be your facilitator of this webinar today as usual, and also as usual Maija Bertule will be providing technical support. This webinar series is a collaboration involving a number of partners, including the Global Environment Facility, UN Environment, IWA and DHI, along with other valued partners making additional contributions on the content along the way. The overall aim of the series is to give an insight into the role that innovative approaches can play in addressing flood and drought management issues. And in this series you can expect to hear about the latest and evolving tools and methodologies, as well as experiences in applying them at different scales in different geographies. Just before moving on with the agenda, I'd like to briefly give you the backstory of this of the webinar series. The webinar itself is a shoot-off of a Global Environment Facility project, which is all about developing and disseminating cutting-edge flood and drought management tools, and these tools are meant to be of generic applicability. What's been developed in the project is based on specific input from river basin stakeholders in 3 quite diverse geographies, as well as other experts. And following developing and testing of these tools, they're going to be made freely available online with user instructions on how to go about applying them. And if you want to learn more about this project, please check out the link here. And you can also, of course, check out the 2 earlier webinars in these in this series. So today we're very pleased to have 2 experts who are going to be sharing their knowledge and experiences with us. We're going to begin with a presentation from Mr. Chris Shitote from the Famine Early Warning Systems Network, and he's going to be talking about early drought warning and monitoring in Africa. And following Chris, we're going to have my good colleague, Mr. Oluf Jessen. Olaf will be providing an insight into some ongoing steps to address drought management in Ghana. Each presentation, as usual, is going to take about 10 to 15 minutes. The plan is to allow for 1 or 2 questions immediately after each presentation, just to break things up. We'll also be allowing for some space right at the end for you to come with your questions, which the participants will do their best to, the presenters, sorry, will do their best to address. If you look at your screen in front of you, you will notice a grey box on the left-hand side. If you expand that box, if it isn't already expanded, you will see that there's a tab there for questions. If you click that plus button, that's the place where you can submit your questions. If you do that, Maija will do her best to field those questions and feed them to me along the way. We'll do our best to cover as many as possible, but please make good use of that. I also need to remember to tell you that all the slides and webinar recordings in this series, including this one of course, are going to be made publicly available on YouTube, and you can also access them through our and the project websites within the next few days. Without further ado, I'd like to ask Maija to pass over to Chris so he can begin. So
I think Maija, you run my slides for me.
That's right. Just so you know, everyone, we have Chris on a telephone connection from Nairobi, and Maija is very kindly running his slides for him. So we can hear you, Chris. Maija, if you could just move that arrow to the side. Perfect. Then Chris, please feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Okay, I think I'll start right away, and I'll take quite a short period of your time. So basically, I think you're able to see me on that picture. That's me, and I work for FuseNet, the Farmer and Early Warning Systems network here in the main office is in Nairobi, and we represent several countries. So if you may just go to the next slide. This is the outline of my presentation today. I'm basically going to show the coverage. Maybe most of you already know the countries that we cover, and then I shall try to see to present to you and how we monitor, we do early warning drought assessments, and as the season progresses, how we keep monitoring it, and even after the season, what happens. And maybe I'm hoping that this will raise some plenary discussions. So next. So this basically points to the area coverage of the FuseNet countries. As you can see, most of the countries are in East Africa, and also we cover Yemen as a part of the East African office because of proximity, and Afghanistan is an office on its own, and then we also cover Central America. So for Africa, it's divided into 3 main zones. That's the East Africa office, the Southern Africa office, and the Western Africa office. And each of these offices has a field scientist that now field scientists within each country. And it started as a project in 1981, but then got fully fledged in 1984 when we had a very severe drought in the eastern horn of Africa. That's Ethiopia mostly. And over time now we've developed products and services that assist us in early warning and climate, basically food security monitoring. And in terms of food security, we look at 3 main components. The first is food availability. So we try and ask ourselves, is food available in terms of was the production well, how was the season, and things like that. And then we look at food accessibility. Can it reach to the people? That so if the harvest is good, then what next? So can the people access it? And then the next we look at the nutrition bit of it. So is it good in terms of nutrition value to the population? And with that, we have 5 main components. We have the agricultural component, and then we combine it with climate now to form the agroclimatology as a unit. And then we also monitor livelihoods of these communities and populations that are termed as food insecure. And we also monitor markets, which now assist us in determining now the food accessibility and things like that. And then the utilization part is now catered within the nutrition, and this is usually achieved through assessments and field observations. Next, please. So basically, before the season starts, so for example, looking at the October, November, December back in 2016, we try and understand what does the season mean for what region. So for example, this is a map of Kenya, and we look at the October, November, December in terms of its significance annual rainfall, and which areas now this map now assists us that matter. Then the next thing we also ask ourselves is when does it rain in terms of rainfall distribution throughout the season. So looking at October, November, December, when do we expect rains, and how will now the season look like? So looking at now the monthly totals in terms of cumulative rainfall, coming from now the significance of the season, and now looking at the monthly totals, we try and see that the main month, for example, for the October, November, December for areas in Kenya is November. So that means that if October fails, then we still have a chance of recovery in November. But then if 2 or 3 weeks into November and you still don't see anything, and that is regarded as the highest, as the peak month, then we start now creating alerts and saying that, hey, the situation might not be as good as we expected, or as climatology. Basically, by climatology, I mean the 30-year series portrays it to be. And then from there, we also look at the amount. So as much as this rainfall might be important to this area, and even if it rains in a particular month, so what are the total amounts of rainfall that we are talking about? So an area that receives, let's say, 300 millimeters, and it's regarded as, and then the season is forecasted as to receive below maybe 100 millimeters, then that means that that area will be stressed compared to maybe an area that receives 1,000, and the forecast is saying below maybe by 100 millimeters. So we try and put also amounts to it, and this is based on satellite and station observation, which are blended together. And now with this, now we are able to really now define areas of interest based on the significance of the season, in terms of when does it rain, when does it peak, and also in terms of the amounts of the season. Next. Okay, it's not shifting on my end, but okay, it's shifted. The next, also before the season now, once we've understood the season, the October, November, December for this example, we try and say, now what are the climate drivers saying? So like for Eastern Africa, we are looking at the sea surface temperature that are close to us, that is the Indian Ocean and the part of the Pacific. And with this now we try to see what are the trends, and is it going down or is it going up? And we have defined thresholds that have been observed over time, such that if it gets to this threshold, then we say that we're going to have, let's say, a good season in terms of rainfall amounts, or we're going to have a dry signal in terms of rainfall amounts. So all these, some of the drivers that we look is the Indian Ocean dipole, which is much closer to the coastal of Somalia and Kenya, and this actually influences the rainfall amounts. And we look at the temperature, the sea surface temperature over time, and see that if it is below minus 0.5, then that means that we are likely to have a dry signal. And now that starts raising issues. And with that, now we look, if it's now regarded as a minus 0.5 or a plus 0.5, we look back into history and say which other years looked similar in terms of the sea surface temperature values. And then we have classified now the El Nino is basically the plus 0.5, and the La Nina is basically the minus 0.5. So with this, we've now classified it into a weak, moderate, or sometimes a very strong El Nino or La Nina. So if it's maybe a dry, that out of these, can we build scenarios? So we look at, is it a weak La Nina? If it's a weak La Nina, then we look back in history and see these are some of the weak La Ninas that we have. So through that, we create something called an analog year. So an analog year is basically a year that similar, resembles, or rather looks like the current year. So with that, now you can see the graph, I think, at the middle, just showing that this is where we are. And then as we go into the next season and we are having maybe 1 or 2 years that are similar, then we are likely to pan out either similar to that, or even above or below that. And with that, now we create scenarios such as the most likely for the weak La Ninas, and if it's a strong La Nina, we create a worst case scenario based on the strong La Nina events over time. Next, please. And then apart from now, as we approach now the season, we now start developing forecasts, and the forecasts either are developed within our own regions, or now we have other centers, climate centers such as the US or the UK or the Australian meteorology department. So with this now, they develop forecasts and say that this is the conditions going forward into the next 3 or so months. So looking at the October, November, December, this is what is likely to happen in terms of rainfall forecast. And we don't look at only one forecast. We look at several forecasts and try to see if there are any similarities. So if you get a good probability from each one of them in terms of a dry signal or a wet signal, then you know that that is something to keep in mind as you go into the next. Now some of the products that we look at during the season. So what resources do we have as FuseNet or as other organizations in terms of monitoring these climatic conditions? And the products that we see there are found within the USGS, which we work closely with, and they're mainly remote sensing, satellite-based observations. But the good thing with them is that they're timely in terms of when we need them, they're there, and also reliable and comprehensive. So over time, you know, it's good to look at the trends and the way they have been observed over time, so that even if you have a slight error, but then the trend looks similar, then with these data sets that we have, then we can also go now to the ground later on and validate or see how best we can modify them to suit what's on the ground. Next. Okay, it's not moving on my end, but I think next slide as well. So so as the season progresses, we try and see in terms of rainfall amounts, where are we at? So how is the quality of the season at the moment? So we are looking at a season where we have either rainfall deficits or surplus, and with this now, we try now and see that if we have deficits, for example, what is the next 1 or 2 weeks forecast saying? So this is mainly the first or the second week into the season, and we keep monitoring this as almost every week as the season progresses. So if you say that we have a deficit of minus 100 or minus in the next 1 or 2 weeks, and will it be able to now claim the start of the season? And also we try and determine the start of the season based on the rainfall amounts that has been encountered in a particular area. So for example, if it's a maize growing area or a rangeland growing area, we have models that assist us in now defining that if it is for a maize crop, let us define maybe about 25 millimeters for the first 10 days and then 20 millimeters for the subsequent 10 days. Then if that is achieved at the end of maybe 1 month, then we are able now to say that the season will start, and then from there we start now monitoring it as it progresses. So as the season progresses, there is now the cumulative total within the soil just to account for the soil moisture. Next, please. Again, so apart from now the rainfall components, we also try and see what are the impacts of now the rainfall on vegetation. And like I've mentioned earlier, we have models and we have independent data streams that we also look at. So one of the main key data set that we look at is NDVI, and NDVI is basically looking at the vegetation health conditions. So, but for this case, we don't look at the actual NDVI, but we look at the anomaly. Anomaly basically meaning that if it's either not below normal or above normal to to a certain baseline. So we create baselines and then do a computation of either above or below to now give us an actual picture on the ground. So with the NDVI now we are able to monitor rangeland conditions. Also sometimes we might also be able to monitor cropland conditions, but we reserve the cropland conditions for the GOWR it's the water requirement satisfaction index, and with the water requirements that are able to be defined based on coefficients, and these coefficients are either gotten depending on the country. For example, in East Africa, I think we have the FAO, which I think is also in most countries globally, but also the Ministry of Agriculture in these specific countries that define the coefficients, and also try to understand that for a specific seed type, you only need maybe 30 millimeters at the end of a certain period of time. And that's now ingested into these models, the WRSI. We are able now to come up with a model that says that this is the conditions of the crop. Has the season started for this crop? Has the season how is the season panning out? If it has started, how is it? Is it tending towards failure? Is it average, which is a mediocre condition, or is it good, or how is it panning out? But then we have some limitations because it doesn't cater for events such as floods, for this matter. So any case, if you have a flood, then you'll be it will only point out as a favorable crop. Next, please. So after the season now, we try and see that we try and assess the season. So we look back and say how has the year been, and we divide it into season by season. So looking at the March, April, May, and then the June, July, September for some countries, and then the October, November, December again for some countries. We are able now to see, do we have where did we fail? When did we fail? Has the drought conditions that we are talking about started now? So rolling back, you can clearly see that we've been having a very lean since March for some areas such as the northeastern Kenya, little in terms of amounts of rainfall for this period. So over time, this build up, even if you get a good rain in 1 month, then we need to be able to fill in the deficits that we already have. So this now becomes such that you're able now to make conclusion of the season, such that the season has not failed because the October, November, December rains have failed, but it has failed because we've been having a prolonged dry spell since maybe May or so. Next, please. And after that, now we try and look at independent data streams. And by independent data streams, we look at various data sets such as the rainfall estimates, the NDVI, the evapotranspiration, the soil moisture, and then combining all these together and say, are they pointing towards the same thing? So if they're pointing towards the same thing, then we say we have convergence of evidence. So FuseNet basically believes in convergence of evidence, not looking at only one data stream and concluding, but then looking at several data streams. So for example, the map on the left, the top left, basically looking at the standard precipitation index. So you're measuring how good or bad is it in terms of variation from the average. And I think, forgive me, I think it's for December 2016 and not 2015. And then with that, now we bring in the NDVI. So if the rains are indicating as fail, then what is the NDVI pointing to? So the brown colors basically saying that this is drier than normal, or the vegetation didn't perform quite well. And also looking at now the evapotranspiration rate, how was it? So if there is no vegetation, then that means there is no evapotranspiration basically. So will be low because there's no rainfall to feed into the such that even when you're going into the next season, at what point are you in this season? So with that now in mind, you're able now to come up with a bigger question. Maybe the graph on the lower left is not displaying well, but it basically looks at the drought frequency and trying to ask ourselves, for example, in Kenya, are the droughts increasing or decreasing? If possible, maybe later we can expand it to show now the actual values. But are we seeing a drought increase in frequencies, and also are also the floods becoming more frequent? So we have all these extreme events that keep popping up, but then how frequent are they in the past maybe 10 or so years? So looking back all that, we can now conclude out of these and say that maybe even going forward we should expect the same and things like that. Next. And then
Chris,
after that,
sorry to just jump in a second. We need to round up shortly, so we have some time to get some questions for you. Thanks.
Okay, sure. I'm actually, okay, thank you. I only have, I think, 2 slides left, so thank you for that. The next slide basically looks at the field observation. So after the season is done then, how do we validate some of these products? So looking at the crop model, for example, there are field drives that people undertake, and through these they're able to take pictures, and we look at the pixel value. So if it's, let's say, a red picture, which is failure, what is the situation on the ground? If it's a yellow pixel, which is a mediocre, what is the conditions in the ground? If it's a green pixel, what does it point to? So we are able now to validate some of our products, and with that now come up with better reporting needs. So so basically, in a nutshell, at different time steps, either decadal, which is only 10 days, and the other thing is that we believe in convergence of evidence, and we also look at the impacts. So based on all these now, we are able now to come up with a better maybe drought or floods analysis. Thank you.
Many thanks for that, Chris. It's been great getting you live on the line there. There's been a few problems with the connection, so I think we're going to just adjust our webinar plan for today. What I'm going to do now is, while we still have you, I'm going to ask you your questions that have come through so far. So please hang around, and then once we're done here, you can you can be free to escape if you like. And if the audience have any additional questions for Chris as we go along, please send them through to us, and we'll make sure that Chris gets hold of those. So even though Chris is probably going to disappear at some point soon, please send your questions through to him. So Chris, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, great. A few questions for you. First one. We'll do them one by one. How do you integrate data for forecasts, especially when these data sources are so different from each other?
Okay, do you want me to answer one by one, or you wanted to ask all of them?
We'll take them one by one, because then I know you're around.
Okay, sure. So for the forecast, what we do, for example, the forecast, because we have a localized forecast, and then we have now the global and the Europeans. But for the local region within our area, and with that we have different methods that we undertake. So we have this dynamical bit of the forecast, which looks at other variables, and then we have the statistical bit of it, which for this case only looks at maybe the sea surface temperature, and not looking at any other dynamics. But once each one of us now, for a given region, one undertakes the forecast, and then after that we come together now through the IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center, that's the IGPAC. Then we come together and we are able now to just look at each country and now come up with a consensus and say that these are the current situation, these are the drivers, the dynamical forecasts are pointing to this, and this is what we have. So if there's something that is off, then we go back to the drawing board and say, why is it this different? So then again, we reanalyze that and come up with now a much better forecast.
Thanks, Chris. Very briefly, could you tell us how is this information used by countries and where can it be accessed?
So, for example, for FuseNet, for example, actually I had mentioned earlier that we are having a training, but now when the forecast is out, it is sent through now the Kenya FuseNet office. It is sent now to various ministries. And if it's a regional forecast, we usually have climate outlook forums. So for the Eastern Africa, it's called the GACO, the Greater Horn of Africa Climate Outlook Forums. And with this now, they come up now with bulletins that are sector specifics. So for example, if you're looking at agriculture, they're able now to point out that what does let's say below average the agriculture sector. And and there are meteorological directors, and these county meteorological directors, which are the second in administration, they pick the forecast and now they downscale it now into their counties. So using the gridded data set, the satellite data sets that we have, we are able now to downscale these wide or global forecasts into a more localized forecast, and then out of these again within the counties we are able now to give it to define a sector specific in terms of, let's say, infrastructure or transport or agriculture and things like that. So through the ministries now we are able now to reach more people on the ground. And then also in addition to that is that through now the agriculture ministry, they're able now to even now customize it further and now be able to send even maybe messages to now the farmers through their extension officers within the ground. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Chris. And a last question, perhaps a little bit of a tricky one, at least the first part. What do you see are the main weaknesses of the FuseNet approach, and what are your future plans at FuseNet?
Yeah, actually it's a tricky one, but I'll try.
You have no weaknesses, I'm sure.
I think the main weakness is that we can't be everywhere. So we rely mostly on satellite data sets, which is estimates, and sometimes whatever now comes through might not quite reflect everywhere what's happening on the ground. So you find we have challenges in maybe reporting to area specific of maybe 5 by 5 kilometers. So anything that is happening now, either you send someone on the ground, which, like I said, you can't be everywhere. I don't know if I've answered that question. And going forward is we are developing. We have actually developed now a way that we can now blend. We call it blending, so that we match the satellite information with the field information that is coming through. So after that, we are able to now come up with a much robust data set that now the accuracy is improved, the efficiency in reporting is much better. I don't know if I tackled part of your question.
Oh, no, very good, very good. Thank you very much. That's all we have time for now with Chris, I'm afraid, and we're going to be moving on to Olaf very shortly. I would just like to say, repeat, please send through your questions for Chris if you have some. I can see some additional ones that are already coming through, which I haven't managed to fit in, but send those to us and we'll make sure that Chris gets hold of them, and I'm sure Chris won't mind giving you some answers which will help you. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Maija to pass over to Olaf, who will continue with today's presentation, focusing on experiences in Ghana.
Okay, thank you everyone. I love to leave.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay.
Thanks, Olaf. We can see your presentation, Olaf, and I think we can hear you. So please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Garrett, and also thank you, Chris, for this very nice presentation. My name is Oluf Jessen. I am from the Water Resource Department at DHI, and I'm located here in Denmark. This presentation will not be as technical as the one you just heard from Chris, but it will focus also on drought early warning, and it will focus on a specific project which is ongoing in Ghana. And I will not I'll not give you a lot of background to the project, but it's a project which is funded by the Climate Technology Center and Network, and it's based on a request from Ghana on the need for an increased capacity and also knowledge of drought early warning forecasting within Ghana. The background for this project is that a very large part of the workforce in Ghana is actually employed or related to the agricultural sector in somehow. And also a very large part of the crop production is done on rain-fed areas. There's actually very few areas in Ghana which is irrigated. So this means that there's a very high likelihood of impact or vulnerability towards climate variability, meaning that the rainfall will vary from year to year, or also very high likelihood of impact on the long-term climate change. So it's a very important issue for the country, as it has potentially has a very high impact on a number of different sectors within the country. Looking at the rainfall variability within the country, then there's a very distinct seasonal pattern, but there's also a very large variability from year to year. The two plots at the bottom of the slides shows the monthly accumulated rainfall for the last 15 years. So each color represents a specific year. And the plot to the left shows the rainfall pattern in the northern part of the country, and the plot to the right shows the rainfall in the southern part of the country. And you can see in the northern part of the country there's a very distinct rainy period, but that you can also see there's a very high variability in the rainfall from year to year. And the same actually applies in the southern part of the country, even though there are two rainy seasons, there's also two crop periods. So this means that for the farmers, when they move into the rainy seasons, it's very critical that they receive reliable information on the upcoming rainy season, basically on what to plant and when to plant it, and also some information on the likelihood of the crops to fail in the upcoming season. And this is where a drought early warning system comes in, and as the main objective of a drought early warning system is to provide information to relevant organizations and sectors and allow these to take actions that can actually mitigate impacts of upcoming drought events or hazards. So the whole objective of a drought early warning system is to be able to increase the capacity and enable organizations and stakeholders to be proactive before an upcoming drought event occurs. So a drought early warning system fits into the risk management part of a drought management circle. In Ghana, if we're looking at how the drought warning or management works currently, then some of the key agencies are the Meteorological Agency, of course, which provides both historical, current, and forecasted climatic information. This information is disseminated to the Ministry of Food and Agriculture. They evaluate the impact on in the different regions of the country, and this information is then disseminated to regional offices and then further down to local farm organizations and then to the farmers at the end. So this is kind of the workflow that exists in the country. If you have a situation where you have a very severe drought event or hazard, so you have actually a disaster, then you have the National Disaster Management Organization that takes over, and they then provide relief aid to the impacted areas. And this is what you can call a crisis management. This is where you react to an already occurred event. While the risk management part, this is the upper part where you try to evaluate how should we mitigate upcoming events. And this is also where the drought early warning system tries to fit in and embed into the workflow. The early warning concept that we are implementing is based on different steps, where the first step is quite similar to what Chris explained. This is basically to identify hazards, both current and upcoming hazards. So both identify the location and severity of the hazard, and this is mainly based on drought indices. The second step is to evaluate the impact of these hazards. So this is either based on drought categories or is based on impacts derived from different types of models, either crop models or water resource models. And then the last part is risk assessment based on hazard, exposure, and vulnerability mapping, where different risk assessments or risk maps are produced from different vulnerability types. And then these outputs are then embedded into national planning and dissemination, and can both be used for the overall planning within the country, but can also be disseminated to end users at different scales. I will just very briefly go through these different steps without going into too much detail. The first step is the hazard identification. This is mainly based on satellite data, and the reason for that is that they are available in near real time, and it's very difficult to get near real-time data in a country like Ghana. So it's a combination of satellite data and seasonal forecast. This is then used for calculation of a number of different drought indices. So we have indices that are targeting different types of droughts. And then these indices are then linked to what we call hazard categories, so that specific ranges of index values are then linked to a specific hazard category. So you have a direct link between an index value and a hazard category, and there also an impact. The outcome of this is that you can identify hazards both on the spatial scale, so you can actually locate where do we have a hazard based on these drought indices and categories, but you can also look at the temporal scale to look at when do we have a hazard in different types of the country or within a region. This can both be done on a current or looking back in time, but you can also look at this looking ahead in time, where we are using a seasonal forecast product with 20 members describing the likely outcome of the rainfall for the coming months. So this can be used to describe what is the likelihood of encountering a specific drought hazard in the coming months. The next step is to look at the impacts, and this we are doing in two different ways. The first very simple way is simply to do some statistics on the hazard categories within different exposed areas. So this could be within rain-fed areas, it could also be within grassland for cattle, or it could be within other exposed areas. So there we provide some statistical information on the coverage of different hazard categories within these exposed areas, and this can then be used as a warning if the coverage of a specific hazard category exceeds a certain threshold level. Another way of looking at the impact is by using different types of tools to derive impacts on either the crops or the water resource or other types of areas. And in this particular project, the focus is on crop. So we are using the FAO Aqua Crop tool and linking this up with the hazard identification, meaning the climate, and then we use that to evaluate the likely crop production throughout the coming months, and then we compare that with the historic values. And this is then one way for the stakeholders to evaluate what is the likelihood of a certain crop to fail or the production to be less than they would expect. Then the last part of in the early warning process is a risk assessment calculation, which is a very simple. In our case, we're doing it as a very simple raster overlay process where we overlay the hazard with the exposure and the vulnerability, and then the outcome is a risk map providing the risk towards different vulnerable areas for this specific hazard. So there will be different types of risk maps for different vulnerability types. And these risk maps are then fed into a planning process at a certain level. The specific early warning that we provide are divided into 3 different components. We have on the hazard identification itself, we provide warnings when a specific hazard has occurred over a specific duration and exceeding a specific threshold. So there's a user-specified threshold or duration that can then trigger a hazard warning. And this is more a general warning, just providing a notice of a specific hazard occurring. Then we also provide more specific warning on the impact part, and for this project we focus the impact warning on the crop production, the crop yield, both on the crop yield but also on the crop order demand, and this particular warning is then going through the Ministry of Food and Agriculture down to the farming organizations. And then the last type of warning that we are providing is on the risk assessment part, which is a sector-specific warning or risk, you can say. And this is not disseminated out to end users, but this is used at the ministry level for planning, looking into how to mitigate these risks over either a seasonal time span or a longer time span. And used in the planning process. This project in Ghana is ongoing at the moment. It's finishing in a few months, and then at that time we will have an operational drought early warning system running in Ghana. And the intention is that most of these outcomes will be fully automated, so it will be a tool that can run more or less by itself, but with user inputs on the thresholds and durations for when a warning should be exceeded, and also on a user input on how the vulnerability and exposed areas should be ranked. So we don't have the capacity like FuseNet to actually go down and then manually adjust the warnings going into a season, but it has to be more or less fully automated. This project is seen as a first step to perhaps a larger upscaling of a drought system in West Africa. And we're trying to work very closely together, both with national stakeholders but also with regional stakeholders in West Africa. Yes, this was my last slide. Thank you.
Many thanks for that, Olaf. Please hang around because we'll have some questions for you right now, I think. Who are the intended users, and what is the expected outcome?
I mean the intended end users of this, at the end it is actually all the way down to the farming level, but as from a project point of view and also from the drought early warning system that we are developing, this is targeting the Ministry of Food and Agriculture and also the Water Resource Commission in Ghana. So we're trying to target this at the ministry level, and then the intention is that we should feed into their dissemination process. So we are not we are not trying to create a parallel dissemination process compared to what is already existing. And the hopeful outcome of this is that that they will have a higher resilience to climate variability in the country.
Okay, great. Because that leads on to the next question, which is how typical are the experiences in Ghana compared to the other countries within the region? Are there lessons that can be learned there from your experience?
I think Ghana is probably not a typical country when you talk about drought. I mean, the northern part of Ghana is very dry, and you have dry spells and drought events. But I think the important part with Ghana is that there's been a lot of focus on floods and flood impacts, but very little focus on droughts. But they see that the climate is changing. That they see that the range and the duration of the rainy season and the timing of the rainy seasons is changed. So they really feel that there's a need to increase the capacity related to droughts and how to deal with this. And I think this is quite similar for a lot of countries.
In terms of the work that's being done, is there consideration being made of the exposure or vulnerability of the local populations to drought in the various impact assessments?
Yes, we are trying to do this as much as we can, but the main difficulties for our part is the availability of data and information, as we don't have offices on the ground, and we don't have within this project we don't have the budget to actually go into the field and validate the impact on these sectors.
You mentioned, though, something about plans for upscaling. Would you like to say a few words about that? What's happening, perhaps in the national context and not, or as well as the regional context, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, we already had a number of workshops in Ghana, and there's a very high interest in drought, and there's also a lot of focus on this. And there are talks about trying to merge different ministries and departments together and have a stronger focus on drought, because they also realize that as the current workflow could be improved. So I think there's a strong focus on this, and there's also a movement towards having specific responsibility on the drought area within different ministries and departments.
Perhaps a little bit more specifically on the same topic. Obviously, often an issue in many developing countries and emerging economies is financing. Are there any ideas of where financing sources for this kind of upscaling initiative?
I mean, there are some different donor options, but when discussing with the national stakeholders, I think there's a lot of emphasis on not only relying on donor-funded initiatives when it is as important as this. So there's also a lot of focus on national upscaling and the need for a stronger national focus on this. But then besides that, then there's also quite a lot of interest from donors on these specific areas.
Right, which actually brings me to my last question. One of the challenges sometimes with donor supported projects coming in is anchoring on the ground. In terms of this project, how is this initiative perceived and received by national stakeholders? How well anchored is it in national institutions and processes?
It's quite well anchored. I mean, the main recipient is the Water Resource Commission, which is a very central commission in Ghana, responsible for the water resource assessments, both related to and also impacts from both floods and droughts. So this is a key player in the country. And they are providing the links both to the meteorological organizations, but also to the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, which are the key other organizations. So I would say that it's quite strong anchored, and there's also a lot of national interest on this area.
Many, many thanks for that, Olaf, and thanks also for a great presentation. Maija, if I could ask you to pass the presentation over to me again, please. I will show my screen. Yes, we handled it a little bit of a different way and took the audience questions right after the presentations in two groups. As mentioned, this was the third in the series on floods and drought management tools. Right now we have the next one, number 4, on water safety plans, scheduled for, I think, yeah, there it is, March the 15th, and also another one tentatively on basin planning scheduled for April 25th. We plan to have additional ones in the series as we go along, and of course your suggestions for ideas and topics that we can cover under this theme are most welcome. If you have any burning questions or issues, I'm sorry it was a little bit rushed perhaps with Chris and the sound was a little bit sketchy, so if you have anything you'd like to follow up with Chris or Olaf, send us those questions. We can see who you are and as well as your contact details, so we can forward those on to them. And also Maija will pick up on anything that you can think of a little bit later. As I mentioned, we're always looking to improve the quality of our work and to improve on content, so we'd be very grateful if you could use a couple of minutes to respond to the feedback survey form that you will be receiving automatically when you shut down this webinar. But before you leave us, I'd please like to just thank the presenters once again for taking the time to share their knowledge with us, and I would of course also like to thank you, the participants, for taking the time to join in and share your questions. So without further ado, I'd like to wish you all a very good morning, a good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. Thank you.